If these four signs appear, the best chapter of your life is about to begin. And I want to start with something that most people in the middle of this particular moment in their lives are not being told. Something that would change the entire experience of it if they heard it clearly enough and early enough to actually help. The moment right before the best chapter of your life begins does not feel like anticipation. It does not feel like the calm before something wonderful. Does not feel like standing at the edge of something expansive with the wind at your back and the clear sense that what is coming is worth everything that preceded it. The moment right before the best chapter of your life begins feels, with a consistency that is almost universal across every person who has ever lived through it and looked back clearly enough to describe it honestly, like the worst part, like the lowest point, like the place you were most convinced that whatever was coming next was not going to be better, but simply the continuation of everything that had already been so hard for so long. And the reason I need you to hear that before anything else is because if you are currently in that place, if you are currently somewhere between exhausted and broken, somewhere between holding on and letting go, somewhere that does not feel like the threshold of anything good, this episode was not made for you in the future when things are better. It was made for you right now, in exactly the place you are standing. Because the four signs we are about to discuss are not signs that appear after the storm has passed. They are signs that appear inside it. They are the storm's way of telling you, in the only language a storm knows how to speak, that it is almost done. Stay with me, because by the end of this conversation, you are going to look at the hardest things currently happening in your life with completely different eyes. Let's start with why most people miss these signs entirely, because that matters before we get to the signs themselves. The reason most people miss them is not inattention, not a failure of perception, not the kind of oversight that a different attitude or a more positive mindset could correct. The reason most people miss them is that these signs do not present themselves as signs of something good approaching. They present themselves as problems, as losses, as things going wrong in ways that feel significant and unwelcome, and frequently irreversible. And because they look like problems, because the immediate experience of them is genuinely difficult, we relate to them as obstacles rather than as indicators. We try to fix them, reverse them, minimize their impact, get through them as quickly as possible so we can reach the other side, without ever pausing long enough to notice that the other side they're leading us to is not a return to what was there before, but something categorically different. Something that required exactly this disruption to become available. Something that could not have arrived without the specific losses and the specific difficulties and the specific painful rearrangements of your life that you have been in the middle of and wishing would end. The signs that the best chapter of your life is approaching are not gentle. They are not comfortable. They are not the kind of cosmic wink that self-help content usually promises. They are disguised as the opposite of what they are. And that disguise is so convincing that most people spend the most significant threshold of their lives trying to get off it, rather than recognizing they are standing on the edge of everything they have been working toward without knowing they were working toward it. The first sign is the one that most people experience as failure, and it is the most important one to understand clearly before we move to the others, because it sets the foundation for everything else. The first sign is that something that was not working finally stops working completely. Not slowing down, not showing cracks, not giving you warning signals that you have been managing and hoping will resolve themselves without requiring anything dramatic from you. Stopping. Completely. Finally. In a way that removes every remaining option except the one you have been avoiding because it was the most frightening, the most uncertain, the most requiring of you in terms of genuine change. A relationship that was not right ends in the way relationships that are not right eventually always end. A career that was not yours finally makes it impossible for you to continue pretending it is. A version of yourself that you have been maintaining for other people's comfort becomes so costly to maintain that the maintenance simply gives out, not from a decision, but from an exhaustion so complete that the performance cannot continue, regardless of how much you would prefer it to. Something ends. Something you were still holding on to, even though the holding on was costing you more than the thing was worth, because the thing was familiar, and familiar, even when it is painful, has always felt safer than the unknown that ending it would open up. And now it is ended, not because you were ready, not because you had fully prepared yourself for the opening it creates, but because it was always going to end, and the timing of its ending, as inconvenient and unwelcome and painful as it feels in the immediate experience of it, is not random. It is the first sign. Here is why endings of this specific quality are the first sign, rather than simply losses to be grieved and moved past. In psychology, there is a concept called secondary gain, the hidden benefit that a problematic situation provides that makes it difficult to leave even when the leaving is clearly in your best interest. Secondary gain is why people stay in jobs they hate, relationships that diminish them, cities that no longer fit, identities they have outgrown. Not because they are stupid or without self-awareness, not because they don't know on some level that the situation is not serving them, but because the situation, however problematic, is providing something: familiarity, predictability, a defined role, the particular comfort of knowing what to expect, even when what to expect is not good. And as long as the secondary gain is sufficient, as long as the comfort of the familiar is outweighing the cost of the wrong fit, the ending will not come. The ending comes when the secondary gain finally runs out, when the familiarity stops being comforting enough to justify the cost, when the predictability of the wrong situation becomes less tolerable than the uncertainty of the right one, which hasn't arrived yet and can't be guaranteed and requires a leap that the secondary gain was always making it possible to avoid. The ending of something that was not working is therefore not a failure. It is the collapse of the last barrier between you and the next thing. It is the universe, or your own psychology, or simply the accumulated weight of reality doing what reality does when a situation has run its natural course, removing what was never going to take you where you needed to go, so that you have no choice but to find out where you actually need to go. And that finding out is terrifying. And it is also the first sign. The second sign is one that people almost universally misread as a symptom of something wrong with them, rather than something shifting toward something right. The second sign is that you become, for a period that can last weeks or months, genuinely uninterested in things that used to matter to you. Not depressed, not in the clinical sense that requires intervention, though the distinction between this sign and clinical depression is important to hold carefully and honestly, and we will come back to that. But genuinely, specifically uninterested in the pursuits, the relationships, the distractions, the goals and ambitions and social dynamics that used to occupy your attention and give your days their structure and their sense of forward motion. Things that used to excite you produce a flatness. Plans that used to feel meaningful feel hollow. The life you were living, even the parts of it that were genuinely good, starts to feel slightly too small, slightly too familiar, slightly insufficient in a way you cannot clearly articulate, because the thing it is insufficient for has not yet arrived to provide the contrast that would make the insufficiency visible. This flatness, this hollowing, this quiet withdrawal of investment from the current version of your life, this is not pathology, it is preparation. It is your psyche doing something that it does with remarkable consistency in the period immediately preceding a significant transition. It is withdrawing energy from what was in preparation for investing it in what is coming. It is the internal version of a tree pulling nutrients back from its leaves before winter, not because the tree is dying, but because the tree is preparing for something that requires the conservation of what it has. You are not losing your capacity for engagement. You are redirecting it. The direction it is being redirected toward is not yet visible. But the redirection itself is the sign. Now here is where I need to pause and address the distinction I mentioned a moment ago, because this is a conversation I take seriously, and I am not willing to gloss over it in the interest of keeping the momentum of the episode. The flatness and disengagement of this second sign can look and feel very similar to the flatness and disengagement of clinical depression, and the difference between the two matters enormously for what you should do with the experience. The distinguishing quality, the one that most clearly separates preparatory withdrawal from depressive withdrawal, is the presence or absence of something underneath the flatness. Preparatory withdrawal has something underneath it, a low hum of restlessness, a sense of waiting that is uncomfortable but not hopeless, a quality of something gathering rather than something draining. It feels like the held breath before something, even when you can't identify what the something is. Clinical depression has a different quality underneath the flatness, a heaviness, a hopelessness, an absence of the sense of gathering that makes the preparatory withdrawal feel like waiting rather than ending. If what you are experiencing feels like the latter rather than the former, if there is no hum of restlessness underneath the flatness, but only a heaviness that feels without direction or horizon, please take that seriously. Please speak to someone qualified to help you navigate it. This episode is not a substitute for that conversation, and was never intended to be. But if what you recognize in this description is the restless waiting, the uncomfortable gathering, the flatness that has something underneath it, even when you can't yet name what the something is, read it as the sign it is. Something is preparing. Something is coming. And the withdrawal of your investment from what was is part of how it arrives. The third sign, and the one that arrives with the most discomfort and the least warning, is the one that disrupts your relationships in ways you did not ask for and did not initiate. People start leaving. Or you start leaving people, not through a dramatic decision, but through a gradual, almost involuntary withdrawal of the energy that was maintaining connections that were never entirely mutual, never entirely real, never entirely nourishing in the way that genuine connection is supposed to nourish the people inside it. The social landscape of your life starts to thin in ways that feel lonely before they feel clarifying, ways that produce a kind of grief that is complicated by the fact that what you are grieving is not always people you even particularly liked, but people who were familiar, who were part of the structure of the life you are leaving, even if they were not part of the life you are moving toward. And this thinning, this loss of the social density that was providing a kind of comfort even when it was not providing genuine nourishment, this is the third sign. Because the best chapter of your life cannot be populated by the same cast as the chapter that is ending. Not because the people from the previous chapter are bad people, not because their departure is a judgment on their worth or yours, but because the version of you that is emerging from this transition is not the same version that maintained those connections, and connections that were built around a version of you that is leaving cannot simply transfer to the version that is arriving. The arrival of the best chapter requires a social landscape that has room in it for who you are becoming. And making that room requires the departure of who and what belonged to who you were. What the fourth sign looks like, and why it is the most quietly extraordinary of all four, and why recognizing it will change the entire way you understand the season you are currently standing in. That is exactly where we are going next. The fourth sign is the quietest one. It is the one that arrives last, the one that is easiest to miss, because it does not announce itself with the disruptive energy of the first three, does not come with the obvious difficulty of an ending, or the uncomfortable flatness of withdrawal, or the grief of a social landscape rearranging itself around a new version of you. The fourth sign arrives in stillness. And because it arrives in stillness, in a life that has recently been through the disruption of the first three signs, and is perhaps still processing the losses and the discomforts and the disorientations they produced, it is often dismissed as simply the absence of the previous noise, rather than recognized as something new and specific and worth paying careful attention to. The fourth sign is this: a small, quiet, persistent sense of direction that begins to emerge from underneath everything that has been cleared away by the first three signs. Not a grand vision, not a sudden clarity about exactly where you are going and exactly how you are going to get there and exactly what your life is going to look like when you arrive. Nothing that cinematic or that certain, just a direction. A subtle but consistent pull toward something, a way of spending time that feels different from how time has felt recently. More alive, more real, more genuinely yours, in a way that the flatness of the second sign made temporarily impossible to access. An idea that keeps returning regardless of how many times you dismiss it as impractical or premature, or the kind of thing that happens for other people in other circumstances, but probably not for you in these ones. A conversation that opened something in you that you have not been able to fully close again since. A moment of such complete, uncomplicated presence in a particular activity or place or relationship that your nervous system registered it as home before your conscious mind had finished evaluating whether that made logical sense. This is the fourth sign. And it is the most important one, not because it is the most dramatic, it is the least dramatic of all four, but because it is the first sign that is oriented toward the future rather than away from the past. The first three signs are all, in their different ways, the work of clearing. The ending of what was not working clears the space. The withdrawal of investment from the current chapter clears the energy. The thinning of the social landscape clears the relational territory. All of that clearing is necessary, and none of it is comfortable, and all of it looks, while it is happening, like loss. The fourth sign is the first moment the clearing reveals something. The first moment the space that was made by everything that ended, and everything that withdrew, and everyone that left, starts to show you what it was being made for. And it arrives not as a certainty, but as a whisper, as the gentlest possible indication of a direction that your whole self, not just the thinking part, not just the part that makes decisions based on what makes logical sense, but the feeling part, the knowing part, the part that has been waiting through all three of the previous signs with a patience that you probably did not always credit it for. Your whole self recognizes as true, as yours, as the thing that was always going to be the thing, if you could just get to the other side of enough of the other things that were in the way of it. Now let's talk about what you actually do with these four signs, because recognition without application is not enough. And this episode would be incomplete if it left you with the ability to identify where you are without giving you something useful to do from that identification. Because the temptation, when you recognize the signs, is to immediately try to accelerate the chapter they are pointing toward. To use the recognition of the direction the fourth sign is indicating to construct a plan, to set goals, to organize yourself toward the destination with the same purposeful forward motion that you bring to every other area of your life where you know where you are trying to go. And I want to be honest with you about this impulse because it comes from the right place, from genuine excitement about what is coming, from the relief of finally having a direction after the directionlessness of the second sign. From the very human desire to have agency over the transition, rather than simply being carried by it. But the best chapter of your life is not something you can engineer your way into. It is something you have to grow into. And growing into it requires something that is almost the opposite of purposeful forward motion. It requires the willingness to be in the threshold for as long as the threshold requires, without forcing a door that is not yet fully open. The threshold is the technical term for exactly this, the space between what has ended and what has not yet begun. Psychologists and anthropologists who study life transitions use the word liminal to describe it, from the Latin word for threshold. And what they have consistently found in studying people moving through significant life transitions is that the quality of what emerges on the other side is directly related to the quality of presence the person brought to the liminal space itself. The people who rush through it, who use the first indication of a direction to immediately construct a destination and start moving toward it at full speed, frequently find themselves in a new chapter that is structurally similar to the one they left. Different in content, different in circumstance, but organized by the same underlying patterns, the same unexamined assumptions, the same ways of being in the world that produced the chapter that ended. Because those patterns were never given the liminal space they needed to be examined, they were carried, unexamined, from the ending into the beginning, and they reproduce themselves in the new context with a consistency that eventually makes the new chapter feel, in its deeper texture, uncomfortably like the old one. This is why so many people make the same relationships in different people, find the same dynamics in different jobs, reproduce the same difficulties in different circumstances. Not because they are doomed to repeat themselves, not because genuine change is impossible, but because they moved through the threshold too quickly to let the threshold do what thresholds are designed to do, which is not simply to connect two chapters, but to transform the person walking between them. So what does being genuinely present in the threshold actually look like? Not the self-help version, not the productivity-optimized version, where the liminal space is filled with journaling prompts and vision boards, and the industrious construction of a new identity from better chosen raw materials. The actual, psychologically real version of being present in the threshold. It looks like letting the first 3 signs complete their work without trying to shortcut the process. It looks like allowing the ending to be fully over rather than keeping one foot in what was, because the alternative is too uncertain to stand in completely. It looks like sitting with the flatness of the second sign without immediately medicating it with distraction or forcing yourself back into engagement before the engagement is genuine. It looks like letting the social landscape thin without frantically replacing every departing connection with a new one that fills the space before you have had the chance to understand what the space is showing you. And it looks like treating the 4th sign, the quiet direction, the persistent whisper of something that feels like yours, with the particular reverence it deserves, which is not the reverence of immediately acting on it, but the reverence of listening to it carefully, of taking it seriously without grasping it desperately, of letting it inform your movement without becoming the thing you are racing toward in the same unconscious, unexamined way that you were once racing toward everything else. Because the best chapter of your life is not a destination. This is perhaps the most important thing I can tell you, and the thing that is most consistently missed in every conversation about new beginnings and turning points, and the signs that something good is approaching. The best chapter of your life is not a destination you arrive at and then inhabit statically, not a problem that gets solved, not a version of your circumstances that finally matches the version you always imagined when you pictured things being okay. It is a quality of living, a quality of being present in your own experience, with enough of yourself actually there to feel the fullness of it. A quality of relationship with the people around you that is built on who you actually are, rather than who you were performing for their comfort or your belonging. A quality of engagement with your own days that comes from genuine alignment between how you are spending your time and what you actually, deeply, when everything else is quiet, care about. That quality does not announce its arrival. It accumulates. It builds in the small moments that the threshold prepared you to notice, and the clearing made room for, and the 4th sign was pointing you toward. It builds in the ordinary Tuesday afternoon that feels, for no reason you can immediately name, more real than most Tuesdays have felt in a long time. In the conversation that leaves you feeling more like yourself than you have felt in longer than you can clearly remember. In the quiet at the end of a day that contains, underneath its ordinariness, a low and steady and completely unfamiliar sense of rightness. That rightness is the chapter, not the dramatic beginning of it, not the moment you can point to and say, here, this is where it started. Just the quiet, accumulating, unmistakable sense that the life you are living is, finally and genuinely and without performance, yours. So if you are currently inside any of these four signs, if something in your life has recently ended in a way that felt like failure, if you are experiencing a flatness and disinterest that has worried you, if your social world is thinning in ways that feel lonely before they feel clarifying, or if there is a quiet direction beginning to emerge from underneath everything that has been cleared, I want you to hear this as clearly and as directly as I know how to say it. You are not at the end of something good. You are at the beginning of the best thing. The signs are not your life falling apart. They are your life reorganizing around a version of you that is more complete, more genuine, more fully present to your own experience than the version that entered the previous chapter. The difficulty is real. The loss is real. The discomfort of the threshold is real, and it deserves to be acknowledged rather than bypassed. But so is what is coming. And what is coming has been made possible by every single thing that has recently felt like it was going wrong. Every ending, every withdrawal, every departure, every moment of uncomfortable stillness in which the fourth sign arrived in a whisper rather than a shout, and you almost missed it, and then you didn't. That is the threshold doing its work. That is you, in the middle of everything that has been hard, being made